I paid for the entire suit when I bought it, but I'm not. I laid it down somewhere. I laid my jacket down somewhere. I'm not trying to make a statement. I have laid my jacket down, so I apologize for standing out. I make a request, and I'll start it now. That way, maybe we have opportunity to discuss it with our company. But I request your attendance back here at 2 o'clock. And I request it for this reason. The points that we're going to discuss, the points that we're going to address for the next 30 minutes is going to lead us into the conversation at 2 o'clock. The 2 o'clock hour will be used for interaction and discussion. The worship service will be held off at 2 o'clock. We're going to interact at 2 o'clock. I need your feedback. We'll be about 30 minutes, so after you get done with lunch, if you can, find your way back here for about 30 minutes at 2 o'clock so we can discuss some topics and some interests and some challenges that we're facing within the community. The things that we're going to discuss today have got to do with stigma. They've got to do with something that's been challenging to me for several years, and I had the opportunity to attend a get-together, a seminar, for a couple of days and learn what it was called and learned how to try to help it, stigma. We're going to approach 3 topics. We're going to approach leprosy, we're going to approach the tax collector, and we're going to approach the harlot. Stigma, then and now, carries with it a burden that most people aren't prepared to pack. Stigma is a attitude, it's a frame that we have to put up with because of other people's opinions of us. We all do wrong. We all make mistakes. And a lot of us can take and make that mistake, and we can decide not to make that mistake again, and we can move on. Other of us can do wrong, and we can't, for some reason, figure out how to get out of it. We make it again and again and again. And what happens is, when that keeps happening, when that repeated, that consistency, the stigma gets laid on us. We get titled. And not only do we have to overcome our own shortfalls, our own weaknesses, our own habits, but then we've got to rise above the opinions of everyone around us. What a weight, burden that's going to be. So that's going to be the conversation, the point of the lessons today and the 2 o'clock conversation. So Leviticus chapter 13. Leviticus chapter 13 does a good job of breaking down, describing for us what leprosy is, how to work with it, and how to overcome it. Leprosy, we understand, is a skin disease. We, in 2005, as a country, as a world, have branded it eradicated. Leprosy has been eradicated. To be something eradicated, it's got to 1 in every 10,000, less than 1 in every 10,000 people can't be found with it. So leprosy as of 2005 on the world scale is less than 1 in 10,000 people. Leprosy, the skin disease, carries twofold. You're either infected, you're unclean, or you're clean. We're going to take ourselves into Leviticus chapter 13, starting in verse 5. The priest shall look at him on the 7th day, and if his eyes, the infection is not changed and the infection is not spread on the skin, then the priest shall isolate him for 7 more days. The priest shall look at him again on the 7th day, and if the infection is faded and the mark has not spread on the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only a scab, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. Jump down with me in verse 12. If the leprosy breaks out farther than the skin, and the leprosy covers all the skin of him who has the infection from his head, even to his feet, as far as the priest can see, then the priest shall look, and behold, if the leprosy has covered all his body, he shall be pronounced clean. Him who has the infection, it is all turned white, and he is clean. To be recognized and understood to be clean with this leprosy, you're removed from society for 7 days. You're put outside the camp. Removed from the city for 7 days, you're removed from your family, you're removed from your home, you're given only your rations, and you're put outside the camp to leave. You're not to interact with the public. In Bible times, the challenge was it was going to infect others. The entire civilization, the population was going to have this disease. It wasn't going to be remedied, and we were going to have an end to life as we know it. They were taken outside the camp for 7 days. If it had not spread, but it hadn't changed, you had 7 more days you had to stay. 14 days, 2 weeks. You stayed outside the camp. At the end of that 14 days, a priest came out and he checked you again. Now you're on example. You are being checked, looked over. You are being inspected. At the end of 14 days, you're being inspected. When you get inspected, you're given the mark of clean or unclean. In this case, if it hasn't spread or gotten smaller, you're clean. If it spread to the entire body but turned as white as snow over the body as far as the priest can see, you're just considered clean. You're allowed to go back to public. Going back to public after 14 days of being in isolation, can you understand the conversations? When you go back into public, you're going to have those that come up to you and they want to talk about it. They want to understand what happened, what was decided. They want to understand that you understand that they missed you. They were praying for you. And then you're going to have those that don't talk to you. They talk to everybody else about you. There's your stigma. The person that comes back after 14 days of being gone because of a disease, they're going to carry with them the people that are looking at them but won't talk to them, or the people that don't talk to them the same way that they did 14 days ago. And then you've got the chance of being called unclean. We're still in Leviticus 13. We're going to be in verse 2. When a man has the skin of his body, a swelling or a scab or a bright spot, and it becomes an infection of leprosy on the skin of his body, then he shall be brought to Aaron the priest, or to one of his sons the priest. The priest shall look at the mark on the skin of the body, and if the hair and the infection is turned white, and the infection appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is an infection of leprosy. When the priest look at him, he shall be pronounced unclean. Down to verse 12 with me. Verse 14, forgive me. But whenever raw flesh appears on him, he shall be unclean. The priest shall look at the raw flesh, and he shall pronounce him unclean. The raw flesh is unclean, it is leprosy. This is a topic that would make Sydney stomach turn, she says. Those are the kinds of things that she's not, I will not be a doctor, she says, because I don't like things such as skin. It was last night, I got dry feet, and she said, ooh, gross, and she got up and moved away from me. It was interesting. It was a If you're pronounced unclean, you've been outside 14 days, and you're pronounced unclean now. To the one that just got called unclean, their life has changed forever. They are not permitted to go back into society. Being unclean with leprosy, you are cut off from the people that you knew. I'm 41 years old. Heaven forbid I would have leprosy. I would have a skin infection, one that I can't manage. I would be removed from society for 14 days. My wife and my daughter would come and visit me at a distance. I would be given my rations, what I need to survive. And at the end of that 14th day, my priest would come and he would look at me and he would declare me unclean. My wife and my daughter are not to be in contact with me from then on. It's a challenge, isn't it, guys? Look what I would have to do. Let's go to verse 45. This is what I'm to do. Now, when you all are crossing, when you're all going back down and you're going on the way home and I'm on the sidewalk, and you all are headed down. Now we're walking, we're not driving now at this time, so we're walking. When you're all walking home and you all come near me, this is what I'm to do. For the leper who has the infection, his clothes shall be torn. This is verse 45. His clothes shall be torn, and the hair of his head shall be uncovered, and he shall cover his mustache and cry, unclean, unclean. He shall remain unclean all the days during which he has the infection. He is unclean. He shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. That's tough. We understand that in biblical times to be protecting the camp, right? We understand the reasoning for that. Interestingly enough, 2005, leprosy was considered to be eradicated. Before 2005, it was not. The cure for leprosy came in its full form in the 40s. Before that, it wasn't in its full form. It took about 4 or 5 years for leprosy, the cure for leprosy to be worked with and to be tested. In 1940, it became full form. There was an island in Hawaii that's still there. It's a leprosy colony. It's a leper colony. That was where everybody was sent in that area. The U.S. still has it. Up until 1999, that's not too far away for most of us, is it? Up until 1999, our government would send me to Louisiana, Carville, Louisiana. That's where I would receive treatment. When I got to Carville, Louisiana, I am suggested to change my name and to end all personal relationships by my own brethren, right? By my own countrymen. Up until 1999, I was sent to Louisiana, and I was told I needed to change my name, and I needed to end all relationships with the outside world. Talk about a stigma. Now, once the cure was able to make me better, and I wasn't contagious, I wasn't going to further the leprosy to any one of you all, that I would be allowed to come back into contact. How welcome do you think someone is when they come back into contact? It's going to be there, isn't it? India, still today, has hundreds of lepers colonies, still to this day. They still send people off. Now, again, 2005, as the world is concerned, we have eradicated this disease. Up until 2016, everybody was still treated as infected, and there was no fixing it. You were still sent to the colony. Still to this day, in areas of India, people are refused public transportation. They're refused driver's licenses. They're refused marriage certificates. They're not allowed to vote. Still today, because of this disease. I find it interesting that such a challenge for a person to put up with weighs on so far as you've got no support. We're going to pull you, remove you, we're going to plant you like it doesn't exist. We're going to be in Numbers chapter 12. Numbers chapter 12, and I say the stigma of the Old Testament for the reason of chapter 12. Numbers chapter 12 is Aaron and Miriam. Moses had done a good work, and he worked hard, and Aaron had served Moses, as we know. We've talked about it quite a bit here lately. But listen to what happens in verse 1. Then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman who he had married. For he had married a Cushite woman, and they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well? Aaron and Miriam are not satisfied with Moses' choice in a spouse. Whatever the law and rule was then, we're not addressing that now. What we're talking about is that Aaron and Miriam were not satisfied to the point that they thought themselves equal with Moses because of his decision. Now, what the Lord has done for Moses here, the Lord has done for every one of us. Watch this. Hear now my word. Now, the Lord has called Moses, Miriam, and Aaron. And Moses is present here into the doorway of the tent of the tabernacle, and God comes down. It says, and you'll see in verse 4 and 5, He has come down and He's covered the door, the entryway. Hear my words. Verse 6. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, shall make myself known to him in a vision. I shall speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my household. With him I speak mouth to mouth, even openly and not in dark sayings. And he beholds the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant, against Moses? Verse 9. So the anger of the Lord burned against them, and he departed. But when the cloud had withdrawn from over the tent, behold, Miriam was leprous, as white as snow. As Aaron turned toward Miriam, behold, she was leprous. Then Aaron said to Moses, O my Lord, I beg you, do not account this sin to us, which we have acted foolishly and which we have sinned. Oh, do not let her be like one dead, whose flesh is half eaten away when he comes from his mother's womb. You see what happened? Now, you remember back in Leviticus 13, what makes a person clean? Two things, right? The infection doesn't spread, or it gets smaller, or the person is completely covered as white as snow. You remember that? But Aaron is still distraught. His sister is leprous. She's leprous but clean, isn't she? We saw that in Leviticus 13, didn't we? She's clean, but she now has leprosy. The stigma of leprosy is a burden. The stigma, the population, the public opinion of you at that time is such a burden that Aaron begs Moses. And then you find out later that Moses turns to God. Oh God, cure her of this disease. And you'll see God says, if her father had spit in her face, wouldn't she be outside the camp for 7 days? So Miriam has to live outside the camp for 7 days. She has to be removed, secluded, pulled from everyone else for 7 days because of her uncleanness. There's where the stigma falls in. Fortunately, we have a Savior, and we're going to understand His role, His approach. We're going to go to Luke 17 to do that. Luke chapter 17, please. I had 3 points, but according to the time, evidently we'll work it out. Luke chapter 17. Luke chapter 17 is familiar to us. We have the leprous men. We're going to start in verse 11. While he was on the way to Jerusalem, he was passing between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered the village, 10 leprous men who stood at a distance met him, and they raised their voices, saying, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. When he saw them, he said to them, Go and show yourselves to the priest. And as they were going, they were cleansed. Jesus doesn't turn away, and Jesus doesn't shun this disease. When we walk up and we see at a distance the leprous men saw Jesus, we understand, and we're going to assume that these leprous men were coming near Jesus with their mustache covered, crying, unclean, unclean, until they saw who it was. They were going to let this man that was walking the street, the path, know that they were diseased. Jesus, seeing it at the distance, He gives them the authority to be clean. Clean, the leprosy was completely gone. They were covered white as snow, however it may have been. Take yourself to the priest and show yourself to the priest. They had been made clean. Jesus saw beyond the stigma. It's not uncommon for Jesus to do that, is it? We almost put Jesus on a pedestal to the point to where He does that because He's God. But the entire Bible is given to us so we have the understanding that we can be like Jesus. That's why the Bible is for us. Slightly different approach in Matthew 8. Matthew chapter 8. Matthew 8, we find a man of leprosy again. We're going to be in verse 1. When Jesus came down from the mountain, large crowds followed Him. A leper came to Him and bowed down before Him and said, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Jesus stretched out His hand and touched him, saying, I am willing, be cleansed. And immediately the leprosy was cleansed. Jesus here goes beyond even what He did before. He reaches and touches the individual. Wouldn't it be great in this position, you've been removed from society, to have someone actually touch you? When you miss your family and you miss your spouse and you come home, the best thing about it, of course, is their smiling face, but when they come up and they touch you, boy, what a feeling. Makes your hair stand up. Wouldn't that have been great for that young man to be touched? Jesus saw past the stigma. Jesus went farther than the people of the time would have went. Jesus went farther than maybe you or I would have gone. He stepped past the stigma. He touched the man. He made him clean. The relationship with the man. It's not the cleansing as much, but the relationship with the man Jesus saw necessary. We thank God that there was such a man able to step past the stigma, touch and cleanse this individual. Next, we're going to move into the tax collector, and we're going to do it early because I'm running a lot longer than I should have. Matthew chapter 5. Go with me to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, we're going to be in verse 43. The tax collector has got a role of their own. The tax collector, interestingly enough, whenever you hear someone has got sin or there's a sinner, you hear the term and or, the tax collector, right behind them. It's interesting to have an occupation to where you're different than a sinner. You're less than a sinner. You're a tax collector. The tax collector of the Testament times, they were Jews, most likely. Most of the time they were Jews. They were working for the Roman government. They were collecting taxes. So the Jewish people were having to pay the Roman government their money while they lived in their land. And they were having to give it to the one sitting in the booth of their people. And the tax collectors of the time, we understand well that they were skimming. They would take more than what they were asked to do. They were padding their pockets. When you get into being accused, I've heard it said many times, if I'm going to be accused of it, I might as well be guilty of it. Have you ever heard that? Have you ever said it? With the tax collector position, this is going to be a position to where you're never going to outlive the stigma. I expect that this stigma is going to be present the entire time that they're in office and probably well beyond. And if you're going to be accused of skimming off the top, how long before you just give in and say, well, I might as well benefit from the accusations. I might as well get something from it. Right? That's the frame here. Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 43. You have heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and send rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? They weren't thought much of, were they? The dignity wasn't really there, was it? And if you look, up here he causes persecute you. Where is it at? But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who be the sons of your Father. Verse 45, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. All right, so if you are to do that, to be sons of the Father in heaven, then it implies that if you don't do that, you won't be the sons of your Father in heaven. The tax collector not only have been branded, been titled, but they've also been shared here. They're not going to be the sons of the Father in heaven. That's the burden that's packed with this title, with this position. Let's go to Luke 18, Luke chapter 18. In Luke chapter 18, we see two men at the temple. Two men at the temple to pray. Luke chapter 18, starting in verse 9. He also told you this parable to some people who trusted in themselves and they were righteous and viewed others with contempt. Two men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and was praying this to himself, God, I thank you that I am not like other people. I thank you that I'm not like a swindler, I'm not unjust, and I'm not like the adulterers, or I'm not even like this tax collector over here. I fast twice a week and I pay tithes of all that I get. It wasn't enough for this man to thank God for being who he is. He had to bring in the faults of others. Swindler, unjust, adulterer, or even like the tax collector. What hope did the tax collector have in a society that used them as the bottom of every joke? Thankfully, we saw a way through it. Luke chapter 3. Usually I struggle with the time of being able to cover the time that I'm supposed to do. I've gone over time. Luke chapter 3, we're going to be in verse 10. The crowds were questioning him, saying, "Then what shall we do?" And he would answer and say to them, "The man who has 2 tunics is to share with him who has none, and who has food is to do likewise." And some tax collectors also came being baptized. And they said to him, "Teacher, what shall we do?" Now, so there's hope here. The tax collectors are in front of Jesus. They're wanting to be baptized. So these are people that understand the cleansing power of Christ and this baptism. The sin's going to be washed away. What shall we do? And what Jesus says, collect no more than what you have been ordered to collect. That's what they're to do. That is going to change their role in society. That's going to change their habits. That's going to change their... Look at verse 14. Some soldiers were questioning him, saying, "And what about us? What shall we do?" And he said to them, "Do not take money from anyone by force. Do not accuse anyone falsely. Be content with your wages." The soldiers had a list, didn't they? No time do you see be a sinner or a soldier, do you? It's be a sinner or a tax collector. The soldier had a list. The tax collector had a point. The stigma of being a tax collector. This is a stigma that I'm not sure that role that you would ever be able to live past. Luke chapter 5. Luke chapter 5, verse 27. After that he went out, and he noticed a tax collector named Levi sitting in the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he left everything behind and got up and began to follow him. What did Jesus see in this individual? Would you and I have seen? Jesus is walking past, and Jesus sees a man in a position where the stigma, Jesus well knows the stigma. Jesus well knows the reputation of this individual. He tells Levi, "Come and follow me." Jesus was building the church at this time, wasn't he? He was collecting the men so he can take and fashion the church that which you and I follow, worship, and try to uphold to this day, doesn't he? And he picked a tax collector to do it. Jesus saw past the reputation of that individual, didn't he? How long do you think you or I would have to spend with an individual to see past their reputation? Do you think you and I would be able to spend enough time or put up with it enough to see past the reputation? We're ordered to if we're going to imitate Christ, aren't we? Good. We're going to move into Matthew chapter 21. Matthew 21, starting in verse 28. Matthew chapter 21, verse 28. But what do you think? A man had 2 sons, and he came to the first and said, "Son, go to work today in the vineyard." And he answered, "I will not." But afterward he regretted it, and he went. The man came to the second and said the same thing, and he answered, "I will, sir." But he did not go. Which of the 2 did the will of the Father? They said the first. Jesus said to them, "Truly I say to you, the tax collectors and prostitutes will get to the kingdom of God before you." Jesus has confronted the religious elite, and he has taken the 2 positions that are the less, and he has applied them. You of religion, you of understanding, you of knowledge, will not make it to heaven before the tax collector nor the prostitute. Out of time, we'll have no time to talk about the prostitute. It was a topic I wanted to address. That position, it was a position of slavery in the biblical times. I would be put into that position because I could earn a living for the ones that own me. And then if I got up of age and I wasn't of any count anymore, I wasn't appealing, then I would be put away. And when I got put away, I would have to figure out how to feed myself, to live, to take care of the ones that I've birthed probably, right? And I would have to do it without anything over my head or any money coming in. I would have to do it on my own. So where would I go? I would go to the one thing that I know how to do, wouldn't I? I would fall back to the habit. That's all I ever known. That's what I know to do. That's what we do, isn't it? When I work with the youth, a lot of times the way that we operate together, the first thing that I tell them, and it's across the board, I don't care if they're 4, I don't care if they're 14, 18, 20. The first thing that we talk about is there's only one thing that's going to hinder this relationship. If you lie to me, we're done. And of course, with the youth, default kicks in, right? That's what they know. And the first couple times you understand that they've lied to you. But the way I work with that is I tell them, I believe you. I know you wouldn't lie to me. We wouldn't lie to one another. I give them that encouragement. I let them know what I am expecting and what they can be. It ain't but very, very short period of time to where they end up. No more lies. Now you understand that they thought that the fella is silly. I'm silly. What a foolish man to think that I was telling the truth. It doesn't matter. The default. What do you think that the prostitute went with that default? She went back to doing the only thing she knows. Are you and I capable to see past that? Jesus did. Didn't he? They brought her in. They brought this prostitute in the temple, and they stood her there. This woman was being caught in the act of adultery. Now Moses' law says we're to stone her. What say you? Jesus writes on the ground. He stands up and he says, he who is without sin be the first to cast the stone. And he goes back to writing on the ground. In my mind, I like pictures, you understand. In my mind, Jesus is writing the names of the ones that brought her in. That's what I'm seeing. He's writing the names. And under those names, he's writing the sins that he knows that they have. After a short period of time, the oldest, starting with the oldest to the youngest, they all leave. And Jesus stands up. Has there been no one condemn you? No, not one, sir. I don't condemn you either. Don't do it anymore. Like these people of the Bible that we've looked at, you and I are as lost. These people of the Bible, they have been given the opportunity to rise above the stigma. They understand the situation of society. You and I have been able to rise above it also. But there's only one way we've been able to do it. It's through the blood of Christ. It's been well stated many times, the power's in the blood. The blood's in the water. The water is prepared. Is there anyone here that needs the saving blood of Christ? Won't you come as we stand and as we sing?